deeper, Lord, in you. And I pour out my soul deep within me. Deep within me, I pour out my soul. Draw me deeper, Lord, deeper, Lord, in you. Draw me deeper, Lord, deeper, Lord, in you. Let us all together stand. At this time, we'd like to dismiss to the nursery. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My glory be to God and the Father, and glory be to God the Son. Glory be to God the Spirit. Glory be to God. Glory be to God the Father, and glory be to God the Son. Glory be to God the Spirit. Glory be to God. My mighty, my God alone has done great things. God alone is worthy, holy. Sing it like you really mean it now. My my God alone has done great things. Glory be to God the Spirit. Holy is His name. And the church said, you may be seated.
Good morning. It's good to see you this morning. I know we have a lot of our members out today, but we have a lot of guests with us this morning, and we're glad that you're here. We're glad to be host to you this morning as we host the Caruso Experience. In 2013, Harding started a program under my direction called the Caruso Experience. Caruso is the Greek word that means to preach. It's a preacher training camp for 9th to 12th grade boys, and the idea is that we want to be proactive in raising up the next generation of preachers. And so this year, as we enter into our 5th year and our 9th camp, we are blessed to have 37 students from 6 states with us this week studying from the Sermon on the Mount. If you ever wondered why I picked the Sermon on the Mount to be my summer sermon series, it's because I knew I was going to have to help these guys write sermons, and I needed to have been there first. And so we've been studying through the Sermon on the Mount, and these guys will study all week under the direction of our guest lecturer, Randy Harris. We're so thrilled to have Randy with us this week. He's a native of Bentonville, Arkansas. He's a graduate of Harding University and Harding School of Theology. He has taught at Lipscomb, was there for about 10 years and has spent the last 17 at Abilene Christian. Randy spent about 10 or 12 years in local preaching ministry, but for the last several years, he has just traveled the world as a mercenary preacher. And that's how he will function this morning. You know, if you've been at Highway for any length of time, that we study pericope by pericope through books or passages. And we are studying through the Sermon on the Mount. Last week, Matthew chapter 5, where we talked about anger and murder and things like that. And so what comes next in Matthew 5 is about lust, sex, and divorce. And I thought, who better to preach on that than someone other than me? And I prevailed upon Randy. And he wants you to know that, because he wants you to know that he would never of his own free will have chosen to speak to you, a church before whom he's never spoken, about sex, lust, and divorce. So he asked me to let you know, and I did earlier in the week, that this would be a sensitive topic should you not want your children to learn about these things from Randy Harris. But I assured him that you've heard much worse from this pulpit out of my mouth. And so we are thrilled to have him with us. Please give your undivided attention to Randy Harris.
The following is intended only for mature audiences. Viewer discretion advised.
So let me introduce myself in this topic. By the way, this is a preaching camp. Never preach your first sermon to a new group of people on sex, lust, and divorce. All right. A few years ago, I got to do what very few people ever get to do. I got to perform the wedding ceremony for my father. My mother died of a brain tumor. My father developed a relationship with an old family friend whose husband had died. I got to do what no boy should ever have to do. I got to watch my father date. After that gruesome spectacle, they asked for permission to get married, and my brother and I didn't give it right away, but then we started to think it through, and marrying off your aging parent to a slightly younger spouse is one of your better options. So then they did the ultimate dirty trick. They asked me to perform the wedding, and I didn't know what to say. Do you, Dad, take Melba? That didn't sound quite right. So here I am, I'm performing this wedding ceremony for these two people who both had 35-year plus marriages. I'm very happily single, and lecturing my father on marriage just seemed like a really bad idea. So I sort of skipped the sermon and went straight to the I-dos, which seemed safer. And afterwards, my dad says, "Well, Randy, what happened to the sermon there?" And I said, "Well, you know, Dad, I just didn't feel like I had any credibility in that area with you." He said, "Randy, you're my son. You don't have any credibility with me in any area." And I know that's true here, even with that kind introduction. Devin can't give me the kind of credibility he's earned. And so what I'm going to try to do is be very faithful to a text. Because I'm guessing that this text has high credibility with you, even if I don't. So one of the things I encourage people to do with the Sermon on the Mount is, after you memorize it, that's always step one, go back and memorize it again your own way. So, you've heard that it was said by those of old, in fact you've read it in the Hebrew Bible, that you shouldn't commit adultery. I want to tell you something. The moment that lustful look lingers, you've already taken her to bed in your heart. So, you got to be radical. That right eye is looking where it shouldn't look, you got to pluck it out. If that right hand is reaching out to grasp that which it shouldn't have, you got to cut it off. It's better to have one member cut off than to have the whole body and soul go to hell. And you've heard that it was said that if you're going to divorce your wife, you got to do the paperwork. You can't just send her away. You got to give her a proper divorce. But I tell you, anyone who divorces his wife, except for adultery, except for sexual unfaithfulness, adulterizes her. And anyone who marries the woman commits adultery too. Or, to put it another way, everybody in sight gets hit by the shrapnel. How should we read these texts? One book of the Hebrew Bible is devoted to hot, erotic sex poetry. The Song of Solomon. I think I just got some readers for the Bible. And some of the images are a little old-fashioned. You got to be a little careful with them. You got to be a little careful, guys, with telling your girlfriend her neck is like the Tower of Bashan. She may not understand that. Or your hair is like a flock of geese. That one doesn't always work these days. But when you read it, I'm telling you, it is hot. One of my favorite Southern authors, whom if you haven't read, you should, is Clyde Edgerton. Among his other great books, my favorite is called Killer Diller, which is about a Southern Christian college. Imagine that. And I recognize everybody in the book. And one of the more compelling storylines in this book is there is this ex-convict who has come to faith through this older sister, and she has taught him the gospel, and now he's a person of faith, and he's in this Christian school, and he's reading his Bible for the first time, and he comes to Song of Solomon. And he comes back to her and says, "I've just been reading Song of Solomon." And she says, "Yes." He says, "It's hot." And she says, "Oh, no, I don't think so." And he says, have you read it?" And she says, "I think that's about Christ and the church." And he says, "Have you read it?" Yes. So, Jesus always starts, because this is where the Bible starts, with the fundamental goodness of sex, which is tied into creation theology. God created everything and declared it to be good. But it turns out it's not just good. It turns out that it is powerful. Now, I know you probably don't like this image, but every once in a while I kind of get in my imagination God saying, we should have dialed that back a little. In fact, it becomes one of the most potent powers in the universe. And as Jesus approaches the topic here, he does what he does throughout the Sermon on the Mount. He talks about the heart, and he implies the importance of the second moment. Okay, I need you to really dial in for a moment. There is very little evidence that you have much control over moment number one, which for you guys means you see a young lady and you say, "Wow, she is beautiful." Very little evidence you have much control over that. Or, as you saw last week, I don't know if you've noticed, it is really hard to do anything about the moment of anger. As you saw last week, what Jesus is clear about is not what happens in the first moment, but what happens in the second moment. Same thing here. What happens in that second moment? Is it the look that lingers and lusts? When you pay attention to the Sermon on the Mount, you see that Jesus frequently returns to the issue of the eye. it's most clear in chapter 6 when he says, if your eye is evil, the whole person will be full of darkness. And in that context, he is talking about the eye that covets. I want, I want, I want. I want. I see and I want. I see and I want. Same thing here. I see and I want. That's where the moment of noticing beauty turns into lust and turns into sin. I want. And that's the moment that Jesus says, you gotta stop. It's that second moment. Now, I don't entirely know how to do that. I've been working with 18 to 22-year-olds for a long time. And I'm trying to live out the Sermon on the Mount with some, and they generally tell me that the hardest thing about the Sermon on the Mount for them is this. Those of you who are my age or older know that one of the primary cures for lust is age. I got a problem with lust. Well, just wait. Tony Campolo, who's in his 70s, said, my wife told me the other day, let's go upstairs and have sex. And I said, well, I can't do both. So I realize that we are at different places on this. But for those who are younger, those for whom lust is a consuming power, everything depends on the second moment. And what I want to suggest to you is that you have to be prepared for the second moment in advance. If you wait till that moment, it is going to be too late. Now, I've got the neuropsychologist on my side on this. And in our highly sexualized world, we have a real problem here. Contrary to popular belief, there was pornography in my youth. The difference was it was less available. You had to take a risk to get it. Now it's totally available, totally anonymous, and I don't know what would have happened to me in that world. I know that some of the young men here, maybe some of the young women, the statistics say more men than women, have at least experimented with pornography, and there's probably at least 2 or 3 of you who are in trouble. What do we do? Well, I think what Jesus intends for us to do, and what the neuropsychologists say we should do, is you have to be so self-aware that in that moment you are immediately ready to transfer your thinking to something else. And you got to know what it's going to be. That you don't allow yourself to go down that path to anger. Instead, you move towards reconciliation. You don't allow yourself to go down that path of lust. Instead, you direct it in some more positive, productive thing, and you do it immediately. If we do not have recognition in the first 2 or 3 seconds, we are in enormous trouble. I can't tell you how many times I've had people tell me that went to the computer and it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, a half hour, and time evaporates as they go from porn site to porn site, and your best chance is the first 2 or 3 seconds, where you direct yourself to a passage of Scripture, where you direct yourself to a song, where you direct yourself to a Christian image, where you have something prepared to counter powerful lust with. And It's interesting how Jesus puts adultery and divorce together. They are separate matters, although they are not unrelated. One of the ways that we're going to remember the 6 examples that Jesus gives of righteousness in chapter 5 is we're going to remember the phrase mad or, and that way we'll always get them in the right order. Murder, adultery, divorce, oaths, revenge, enemies. It's that easy. And in each case, he gives us examples of what I might call a deeper righteousness. One of the great things about being a college professor is I get to watch the devolving of the English language. It's really fascinating to me. Somewhere along the line, a couple of decades ago, bad came to mean extremely good if you said it with the right inflection. If something was bad, it was bad, but if it was really good, it was bad. And if it was really bad, which means it was extremely good, it was sick. So what Jesus is doing here is telling us, okay, I want you to know what sick, bad righteousness is. I want you to know what righteousness is that goes all the way to the bottom. So here I am, I'm talking to my 18 to 22-year-old guys about divorce. None of them have been divorced yet, although one has now. They're like, okay, what does this have to do with them? But of course, in Scripture, divorce is very closely related to the concept of covenant. It has to do with keeping promises. In the Hebrew Bible, when you were going to make a covenant, what you would do is you would hack up an animal, and you would walk between the pieces of the hacked up animal together. And the symbolism would be that if I break this covenant, what happens to this animal should happen to me. That's fairly serious, right? I do a lot of weddings. I've been trying to bring this one back into weddings. I think talking about deriving the divorce rate down, you have to walk through the midst of a cut-up animal. I mean, that deepens our promises and also lowers the cat population. It's all good. Haven't had really any takers on that. But in many ways, covenant is the most serious word. The most serious word in the Hebrew Bible. God makes covenant with Israel. We make covenants with other people. And keeping covenant has to do with the very character of God. I am very slow to pass judgment on those who have experienced the pain of divorce. Some of the people that I care most about in the world have, and I'm just not inclined to pass judgment. I do want to say that what Jesus says is true. The shrapnel spreads out everywhere. People get hurt by the fallout. And what I want to say particularly to the younger people is this. You have to make it a habit of keeping your promises.